This is another podcast from Alpha Business Media.
Hey there, welcome back to the Deep Dive. It's great to have you with us, and really excited to dig into the sources you brought today. We're heading to a truly legendary part of the world, Nepal and the mighty Himalayas. Specifically, we're diving into those two iconic trekking heavyweights, the routes around Everest and Annapurna. And the core question really bubbling up from this material seems to be, are these world-famous trails starting to show signs of, maybe fatigue? Getting a bit tired. Yeah, the stack of sources you provided, there's a critical analysis, various articles, some recent research, paints a fascinating, maybe slightly worrying picture of the immense pressure on these routes and, importantly, how Nepal is grappling with it. It's definitely not simple.
No, it's really not. It's a complex reality. Our mission today is basically to pull out the most important insights from all this material. We want to give you, the listener, a clear understanding of the current state of these treks, the significant challenges they're facing, and critically, the strategies Nepal is trying to implement to protect them for the future. And like you said, it involves much more than just tourism figures. We're looking at these really intertwined environmental, cultural, and economic dynamics. It's all connected.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The material makes it absolutely clear. Everest, or the Khumbu region, and Annapurna they're the absolute backbone of Nepalese tourism, aren't they?
They really are. They attract what the sources call the lion's share of foreign visitors looking for that specific Himalayan experience.
And we're seeing tourism recover generally in Nepal.
Yes, the overall numbers show a solid recovery after, recent global disruptions. Over 1 million tourists arrived in 2023, even more projected or arrived in 2024, and the first part of 2025 is already showing pretty significant numbers, over 500,000 just January to May.
Wow, okay.
Now, the precise breakdown just for Everest and Annapurna in these very recent months isn't explicitly detailed in the sources we have here, but history tells the story. If you look back, say, pre-COVID 2019, the Khumbu region alone saw something like 60,000 trekkers and climbers.
60,000, just in Khumbu.
Yeah. So as overall tourism rebounds, it's logical to conclude, based on the trends shown in the material, that these classic routes are absorbing a proportional and likely increasing amount of that pressure again.
And you can absolutely see why they're the main draw. I mean, they have this unmatched global fame. Everest is, it's Everest, the highest point on Earth, steeped in that unique Sherpa culture. Right. And Annapurna offers this incredible ecological range. You go from subtropical jungle right up to alpine desert. Plus that rich tapestry of different ethnic groups along the way.
Exactly. And this huge popularity isn't just about, ticking a box or getting bragging rights. It translates directly into vital economic support. For the local communities right there on the trails, tourism is often the primary, sometimes the only, livelihood.
Right.
It creates jobs in lodges, restaurants, for guides, for porters. It stimulates local crafts, other small businesses. Income from tourism directly contributes to poverty reduction and, frankly, improved living standards in these often very remote mountain areas.
And nationally.
On a national level, tourism is Nepal's largest industry. It's a crucial source of foreign exchange. The sources estimate it contributed around 6% to Nepal's GDP in 2024. And a huge chunk of that 6% is tied directly to the success and the continued appeal of these two major trekking areas. Their health, economically speaking, is paramount to the national economy.
But okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and maybe a bit concerning. The material isn't shy about showing the flip side, the downsides. It points to warning signs almost everywhere, suggesting this growing load, this pressure, is taking a serious toll. It's not just an abstract concept, it's physically impacting the environment, and you mentioned changing the culture.
Absolutely. The environmental impact is perhaps the most immediate and visible problem highlighted in these sources. Let's start with garbage. It's described as a staggering issue, particularly on the Everest route. We're talking tons, literally tons of waste generated annually just in the Khumbu region.
Tons, wow. What kind of waste?
Everything. Plastics, food waste, discarded climbing and trekking gear, waste from the lodges. And the challenge is massively compounded by the remote location, the altitude, the lack of proper infrastructure for disposal.
So what happens to it?
Well, the sources say much of it ends up being burned locally, which pollutes the air, or it's simply dumped in pits, or even finds its way into rivers, contaminating soil and water. Now, there are cleanup campaigns. They happen regularly, involving the Nepali Army, local Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee, volunteers, private companies sometimes. But the analysis describes these as more of a reactive measure, sort of like constantly bailing water out of a leaky boat rather than a preventative systemic solution.
So it's a constant battle, not really a sustainable system yet.
Precisely. And closely linked to that is water pollution. Wastewater from lodges and campsites, plus human waste, often flows directly into the streams and rivers.
The same streams people drink from.
Often, yes. People rely on these downstream for drinking water. So this introduces bacterial contamination, impacts the water quality, and creates very real health risks for both local residents and the truckers themselves. Then there's the physical wear and tear on the land itself. Trail erosion is mentioned as significant.
How does that happen?
Just constant foot traffic, people. Yaks, mules. It compacts the soil, widens the trails way beyond their original paths, destroys vegetation along the edges, and this, especially on steep slopes, increases the risk of landslides and mud flows during the monsoon season. It destabilizes the terrain.
Okay, I see.
And finally, despite efforts and some regulations, deforestation continues to be an issue. Wood is still cut, often illegally, for lodge firewood, particularly for heating, water, and cooking.
Even with bans in place.
Even with bans in some areas, yes. It impacts biodiversity, habitats for wildlife, and like trail erosion, it increases the likelihood of natural disasters like landslides. The transition to alternative solar power, propane gas is happening, but it's slow. It's hampered by cost and the sheer logistical difficulty of getting equipment and fuel into these remote high-altitude areas.
It sounds like the very beauty, the pristine nature people travel halfway around the world to see, is genuinely under threat.
That's the core tension, yes.
So moving beyond the physical environment, what about the impact on the local communities and their culture? The sources touched on that too.
They did. And it's another area of concern. While the economic benefits are real and important, there's discussion about the commercialization of culture.
What does that mean in practice?
It means traditional ceremonies, local dances, handicrafts, things that have deep cultural or spiritual meaning can sometimes become performances or just commodities produced for tourists. This can potentially strip away some of their original significance over time. It becomes more about the transaction than the tradition itself. There's also the challenge, common in many rural areas undergoing change, of youth migrating away. They might seek education or different kinds of opportunities outside the mountain areas. This can lead to an erosion of traditional knowledge and skills within the communities. It makes it harder to pass down the practices essential to mountain life, agriculture, and maintaining their unique cultural identity.
Right. And for the traveler, the person paying often quite a lot of money for what they hope is an authentic Himalayan experience. How is all this pressure changing that?
It significantly impacts the experience itself, especially during peak seasons like spring and autumn. The main issue highlighted is route overcrowding.
Like actual queues on the trail.
Yes, the sources mention queues on narrow sections of path, particularly on the Everest Base Camp trek. Lodges get completely packed out, booked solid months in advance. And that desired sense of solitude, of being immersed in this vast, wild landscape, well, it can simply vanish. It becomes more like being part of a crowd.
That must be disappointing for many.
It can be. And it puts immense strain on the limited local infrastructure, things like water supply, sanitation in the lodges. It can even increase safety risks on the trails if paths are congested or people feel rushed.
Okay, let's circle back to the economics again. Does this mean the overcrowding, the environmental issues, the potential loss of authenticity? Could it ultimately hurt Nepal's tourism, bottom line? Are they risking the long-term success of these golden geese, so to speak?
That's a major concern raised in the analysis, absolutely. This combination of overcrowding, visible environmental damage like litter, and perhaps a sense of cultural dilution. It risks the long-term attractiveness of Everest and Annapurna. Discerning tourists, particularly those seeking pristine nature or genuine, uncrowded cultural interaction, might start looking elsewhere. There are other mountain ranges, other trekking destinations in the world.
So, potential decline in revenue down the line.
It's a real risk. If the allure fades because the experience doesn't match the expectation, revenues could decline over time. The sources also note that negative international media reports, particularly about issues like the garbage problem on Everest, are already impacting Nepal's image as a top-tier, pristine trekking destination. That kind of publicity hurts.
Yeah, definitely.
Plus, there's another economic angle. This intense focus on just two areas leads to a very uneven distribution of benefits across the country. Everest and Annapurna are, in some ways, struggling with too much attention, while other incredibly beautiful, less-known regions of Nepal remain underdeveloped and aren't really benefiting from tourism's potential income and jobs. It's very concentrated.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, given all these challenges, what's the path forward according to the sources? It sounds like Nepal is aware of these issues and is actively trying to address them. What strategies are they deploying?
They are certainly taking steps, yes. The material outlines several key approaches. On the regulatory front, they're implementing new government policies and regulations. You see examples like in the Khumbu, where there's now a ban on certain single-use plastics. There's also been ongoing discussion and, in some cases, implementation of measures like mandatory guides for solo trekkers or requiring GPS trackers. These aim to improve safety, but also, importantly, to ensure local employment for guides. Permit systems are obviously in place, and the fees sometimes vary by season or route. And there's ongoing, sometimes contentious debate about introducing potential quotas or caps on visitor numbers on certain popular stretches, especially during the absolute peak weeks.
So, trying to manage the flow and reduce the physical footprint.
Exactly. And alongside that, they are trying to tackle the physical problems more directly with waste management efforts. This includes those regular cleanup campaigns we mentioned, setting up temporary waste collection points along the trails, and trying, despite the huge logistical hurdles, to organize the removal of waste from high altitudes for recycling or proper disposal down in the cities.
That sounds incredibly difficult logistically.
It is. Very. Then there's also a stated commitment at a national level to promoting sustainable tourism. This gets integrated into their national tourism strategies and plans. It involves encouraging the development of things like eco-lodges, lodges that are designed to use renewable energy like solar, utilize local building materials, manage their waste better, and generally minimize their environmental impact.
Right. Now, a strategy that really seemed to stand out in the sources, and you touched on this earlier, is diversification. The idea of actively moving people away from just Everest and Annapurna.
Yes, this is highlighted repeatedly as absolutely crucial. The core idea is to ease the burden on those two giants by developing and actively promoting viable alternatives.
How are they doing that?
Well, one way is by opening up and marketing new trekking routes in previously less visited or underdeveloped regions. The sources point to routes like the Manaslu Circuit, which has gained popularity but still sees far fewer trekkers than Annapurna or Kanchenjunga Base Camp in the far east, or newer trails like the Mundum Trail in the east as well.
Do these offer similar experiences?
They offer incredible, often wilder experiences, but they typically require significant investment in basic infrastructure. First, improving the trails themselves, ensuring there are enough basic lodges or tea houses, maybe better communication networks, and then, crucially, serious marketing effort is needed to let potential visitors know these alternatives exist and are worthwhile.
So it's not just about saying go here instead.
Not at all. Beyond just alternative treks, there's a push to develop and promote alternative forms of tourism altogether. This means highlighting Nepal's other assets. Its rich cultural and historical sites, think the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the Kathmandu Valley, or Lumbini, the birthplace of the Buddha. There's also perceived growth potential in health and wellness, tourism yoga retreats, meditation centers, often capitalizing on the booty near places like Pokhara, adventure sports beyond trekking, whitewater rafting, paragliding, mountain biking, and even things like agritourism or ecotourism, allowing visitors to experience rural Nepali life, maybe stay on a farm, learn about conservation.
And within that diversification, there was a specific focus on something called community-based tourism, right? CBT.
Yes, CBT is emphasized in the sources as particularly vital for achieving sustainable development. The goal here is twofold. First, to ensure that tourism revenue directly benefits the local communities, rather than just outside operators or middlemen. Second, to empower local people, including often marginalized groups like women and youth, giving them ownership and control over tourism in their area.
How does that work in practice?
It often involves offering really authentic experiences, homestays where visitors live with a local family, eating local food, perhaps learning local crafts, being guided on less trodden community trails by local guides. This helps preserve local culture because it's valued and shared authentically, not just commercialized. Initiatives mentioned, like something called Community Connect 2025, are specifically working on developing these models. Examples of successful CBT villages cited include places like Sirubari, Galgan, and Barpak areas that offer a different, perhaps deeper kind of interaction. And it's worth briefly mentioning the role of others, too. The private sector responsible tour operators adopting eco-standards, lodges investing in solar power, they play a part, as do international partners who often provide funding, technical expertise for conservation projects, or support for community development initiatives.
Okay, so a multi-pronged approach. Now, the analysis you shared also mentioned some potentially unexpected leaders or maybe new areas showing real growth potential, specifically looking ahead into 2025. Where are these emerging hotspots supposed to be?
Yeah, this is one of the most interesting bits looking forward. The sources do pinpoint a few areas that seem to be making particularly significant strides or showing strategic vision. One that stands out is Koshi Province, which is in eastern Nepal. They're making a very deliberate, very public statement. They've declared Koshi Tourism Year 2082, that corresponds to 2020-2026 in the Gregorian calendar, under the theme Beautiful Koshi.
Koshi Tourism Year, what does that involve?
Well, they've apparently identified and are actively promoting 82 specific tourism sites across the province. These cover a whole range: cultural sites, religious pilgrimage spots, adventure activities, places offering rural experiences.
82 sites, that's a really concerted effort.
Yeah.
What's their particular angle or advantage?
A key part of their strategy, which the material highlights, is leveraging their proximity to India. They share a long border, so they are actively targeting the large Indian tourist market. They're doing practical things like lobbying for easier cross-border currency exchange limits and simpler processes for Indian vehicles entering Nepal. It's a very pragmatic approach based on their geography.
Makes sense.
And while new international airports popping up elsewhere in Nepal might seem unrelated at first glance, the analysis suggests these could indirectly benefit Koshi too. How? By potentially improving overall domestic travel networks, making it easier for both international arrivals and Nepalis themselves to reach cities in Koshi, like Bharatnagar, which is a major hub there. So the surprise here, as the source puts it, is this really proactive, focused, strategic effort coming from a region that hasn't traditionally been on the main international tourist circuit for trekking like Everest or Annapurna. It shows vision.
Interesting. Where else?
We also see potential highlighted in areas where community-based tourism, CBT, is being successfully implemented or significantly expanded, often linked to initiatives like that Community Connect 2025. So locations in places like Thangkuta, which is actually within Koshi Province, reinforcing their efforts. Or villages like Narchang and Himjakot, which are geographically near the Annapurna region, but are deliberately offering a distinct, community-focused, less crowded experience. Even pockets within the Kathmandu Valley, like the historic towns of Kirtipur and Patan, are developing community-led tours that offer deeper cultural immersion away from the absolute main squares. These places are tapping into that growing demand for authentic interaction and sustainability, moving away from mass tourism models. Their success could genuinely start to redraw Nepal's tourism map, shifting pressure and benefits.
And any other types of areas?
Finally, the sources point to regions developing specific niche offerings. Areas around Pokhara, already popular, are trying to build more consciously on wellness tourism, yoga, meditation retreats, leveraging the beautiful lake and mountain setting. And then you have very remote regions, primarily in western Nepal, like Dolpo or the area around Rara Lake. These are positioning themselves for maybe more extreme adventure, very remote trekking, challenging expeditions, or for travelers seeking deep cultural immersion in relatively untouched Tibetan-influenced cultures. The surprise here isn't about huge visitor numbers yet, but about these less-known places successfully carving out a unique market space by offering something very specific that you can't easily get elsewhere. Now, the material does caution that getting precise, real-time tourist statistics broken down by region for, say, mid-2025 is really challenging. Data collection and reporting takes time. But the level of investment being discussed, the stated government strategies, the specific campaigns like Koshi's and the initiatives happening on the ground, they all clearly indicate that these areas are being actively nurtured and pushed as future growth points.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so pulling it all together now, after digging through all this material, what's the main takeaway? What's the core insight from this deep dive into your sources?
I think the core insight is a really clear, perhaps stark message. Everest and Annapurna are absolutely indispensable to Nepal's identity and economy, but they are facing critical, undeniable challenges. That word fatigue you used at the start. It feels real based on this material: the litter, the pollution, the trail erosion, the cultural commercialization. The sources strongly suggest that without determined, effective, and consistent action, the very things that make these places legendary are genuinely at risk.
But Nepal is acting.
Yes, absolutely. Nepal is implementing strategies we've discussed, the regulations, the cleanup efforts, the sustainability goals. But the overwhelming point coming through seems to be that the absolute key to the long-term survival of the classic routes, and probably the healthy future of Nepalese tourism overall, lies in active, successful diversification. And that means more than just talk. It means genuinely developing, supporting, and promoting those new trekking areas, those alternative forms of tourism we discussed. And within that, community-based tourism seems vital to ensure the benefits actually stay local and that the unique cultures are preserved, not just sold.
That's not easy, right? Success isn't guaranteed just by having a plan.
Not at all. And the sources highlight that success really depends on addressing some pretty significant systemic hurdles. Things like improving basic infrastructure, better roads, more reliable domestic air travel, which is absolutely crucial to make these newer regions truly accessible. Ensuring quality and safety standards are high across the board, not just on the two famous trails. You need consistent standards everywhere. Really effective international marketing is needed to tell the world about these new destinations, to build their reputation, genuinely empowering and partnering with local communities, making them true beneficiaries and decision makers, not just service providers, and maybe underlying a lot of this, creating a stable, transparent governance environment that minimizes issues like corruption. The source material does obliquely mention concerns, for example, around projects like the new Pokhara International Airport, suggesting these wider governance issues can impact tourism development too.
Right, so a big picture perspective is needed.
Exactly. The analysis basically argues that Nepal needs a fundamental rethink, perhaps. Just relying on the incredible global fame of Everest and Annapurna, letting them carry almost the entire burden, isn't a sustainable model for the future. That future, it suggests, has to be about achieving a better balance. It needs to be sustainable environmentally, diversified geographically and by activity, deeply respectful of local cultures, and structured so that the economic benefits flow much more widely, especially back to the local people in these often vulnerable mountain regions. 2025, with initiatives like the Koshi Tourism Year and Community Connect, could be a really pivotal year if these strategies move beyond just being plans on paper and get real, sustained action and investment on the ground.
That's a really insightful summary of what sounds like an incredibly complex situation. It really highlights that Nepal is navigating this huge balancing act, doesn't it? Trying to capitalize on the undeniable global draw of Everest and Annapurna, while simultaneously and urgently needing to protect those very places from the consequences of their own fame. And at the same time trying to build up completely new areas almost from scratch in some cases.
It truly is a balancing act. The tension is palpable when you read through this material. That continued, powerful magnetic pull of the classic peaks, the icons, versus the absolute urgent necessity for implementing sustainable practices there and successfully nurturing new potential in other parts of the country well beyond those well-trodden paths.
Well, thank you for sharing these sources with us and bringing this really critical topic to our attention for this deep dive today. It's given us a lot to think about.
My pleasure. It's an important issue.
And thank you for listening. It leaves us with a thought, doesn't it? Considering these challenges facing Everest and Annapurna and Nepal's clear efforts now to diversify, what does it truly mean for you as a potential traveler to be a responsible visitor if you choose to go to these incredible places? And maybe even more fundamentally, how might our collective choices of destination influence whether these unique environments and cultures can genuinely thrive sustainably into the future? Something to ponder.